All right, welcome everyone. I will give us a minute or two for people to get into the room here. Um, but my name is Paul Shurin. I'm an economist and principal with Impact Data Source, and we're going to be looking at Impact's dashboard today and kind of doing a little bit of an overview, but in general, we're going to dig in a little bit on the different reports that we can generate. So if you have questions as we're going along, feel free to type those out in the chat or the Q&A or wherever you can find a spot to do that in Zoom. We're going to get started here in just a minute, but thanks for joining us. We should be recording this, and we can make it available if you want to watch it later. But I'll just go ahead and get started. We should be able to see my screen here, and we're looking at kind of the initial screen you get when you log into Impact Dashboard now. This is a relatively new page that we added in the last couple weeks. This is our Insights page, and the idea behind it is to really just give you an overview of everything that's going on with your account. So as we look at here, we've got our projects identified here, the different categories or outcomes. As we mentioned, we have active, won, lost, and archive. We can see how many of those projects we have. We can even see kind of among those active projects how they break out in terms of the different types of projects there with a pie chart, and then across different industries we can see that as well. We can click and look at some of the others if we want to for the different categories. The other information that you get right here on the screen is this data forms area, and we can see if we've got any new data forms in our inbox that we've received. So data forms being the data sheets that prospects may have completed and submitted to you. So that would be kind of a place to jump in right here. If you saw a new one, you'd be able to click on it and take a look at what the prospect sent. We also have the area where you can see the email address of people who have begun a data form but haven't completed it. And then we can get straight to our data form templates here as well. The other thing on this page would be our recent projects. So just the last couple projects that you've worked on, you can jump straight back into those if you'd like. So we've got this new, kind of call it a home page, but it's really our Insights page to help us as a starting off point when you log into the model. On this left-hand side, we can see our menu. So again, we are on the Insights page. We can see we have a number of options here under our projects. We can go to our list of all of our active projects. We can go to our list of all of our projects, and then we can jump to those same recent projects that we see there below. We have their data forms area for our inbox and our templates. And then of course our My Account area where we can configure a lot of things, update our logo, change colors, that kind of thing. And then a button for support and a button to sign out. What I'm going to do today is kind of jump straight into a project, and we're going to look at one of my examples, and we'll look at Vandelay Industries. And so Vandelay Industries is a project that kind of a test project here, but you can see I've already run a couple scenarios on it. In fact, I've started this whole process by receiving a data form, and I assigned it to this project, and I was able to create a scenario using that data. And as we see, I've got two scenarios here for the project. On this control center for Vandelay Industries, we can see my list of scenarios at the top. I've got this little highlight on it, and I'm actually previewing this one so I can see this information is reflective of the $400,000 infrastructure grant incentive. If I wanted to, I could preview the other one. So here we can do a preview of this, and we can see our numbers change slightly based on the information in that scenario. Now, as you're noticing, as I hover over a scenario, we have options to rename, copy, or delete. And so we'll kind of take a look at what that all means in just a moment. But I'm going to go ahead and click on this infrastructure grant scenario, and we're going to go into our scenario workspace and take a look at all of the different things we can do when analyzing a scenario. So inside this scenario workspace, we really have three main pages across the top. We've got the scenario info tab, which is where we'll put in all of our project specific information. If the prospect fills out a data form and sends all that information to you, you actually won't have to do a whole lot of work on this page. It'll all get pre-filled or filled in by the data form. The next tab is the public support tab. This is where You'll have options to control different types of incentives you might want to see. In our case, we're on this overview. We can see we only have a $400,000 non-tax incentive from the city of Burleson. We'll talk about more about that in just a moment. We'll also look at some other incentives that we can apply. And then the third kind of main section of this scenario workspace is our reports section. And so this is where we're going to kind of spend a good bit of time today talking about the different reports. As of maybe last September, when we released kind of a big update for this, we now have 3 major types of reports. The first one being this fact sheet. The fact sheet is really just kind of repeating back the basic facts of the project. So this is kind of, you can almost think of it as like a cover page to kind of set the basis for what this project is all about. We can see we've got the major details about the project listed on this page, even in the view that we can see here, telling us the number of jobs, the capital investment, the payroll, and so forth. We can see the NAICS code they've identified. And in the upper right-hand corner, we can see kind of the highlight project type and industry here. So this is a recruitment project in our advanced manufacturing industry. In this particular case on the fact sheet, we've added some additional descriptions and text to really fill it out. But again, we're not really doing any analysis on this fact sheet. We're just kind of laying out kind of the basic facts of the project. Now, as we go over here, we can navigate to our other reports. On the summary reports, this is kind of that main infographic style report where we're going to show some of that analysis that we've done, so some results of that analysis. We get into the economic impact here on the right-hand side, and we'll come back and look at all of this. And we tie it in with the fiscal impact, and then also show an incentive analysis. We'll take more time to look at these in just a moment. The detailed report is going to be that space where you can find kind of a more traditional narrative report, where if you scroll through here, this one's going to be, it's going to be a little bit longer than 1 page. Those other reports we've looked at are just 1-pagers, but this one, you'll see we have a good bit of information on each particular jurisdiction that's included. So in this case, we're seeing fiscal impact for the city, county, school district, and some other entities. So that's what's going on with the reports at a very high level. Now, we have these 3 main pages that we see here. We also have a couple other areas that we can get into, and we'll talk about them. We have a scenario details area, which I'll just click on briefly here. And this is going to be kind of the full set of data inputs. If we want to get into the weeds on a particular project, we can come into our scenario details and really plug in all of the qualitative information in addition to maybe more of the quantitative information that was already entered on the scenario info. The other area on this scenario workspace would be in our settings. So this little gear icon will let us access our settings. And this is where we can kind of tweak things to add different customizations or to modify different parameters. We won't get into too much of that today, but just be aware that in general, with Impact Dashboard, you're going to have control over all of the different parameters, including all the settings and information that we build in for you. So as I mentioned, Impact Dashboard is an online model that Impact Data Source, our company, sets up and customizes for you. And so then all you need to do as a user is provide the project-specific information. As I mentioned before, the project-specific information can mostly be found here on the Scenario Info tab. And again, if you're using the data form in connection with all of this, the prospect will be providing that information for you. So I'll just click through this a little bit in terms of the information that is going into the analysis, and then we'll dig into those reports as I mentioned. So here, if we click on this first little tile that's at the top of our scenario info page, we have a scenario basics a modal that pops up. And this is really just asking for some basic information about the project. One of the very first things we want to understand about a particular project is whether that this is representing a brand new business or is it an existing business. And when we say an existing business, we mean specifically in your community. So the thing that we're ultimately trying to get at is, do we need to be concerned about the retained jobs maybe versus new jobs? And so that's kind of a high level way to think about this. And if it's just a brand new business with all new employees, you can hit new business. If it's an existing business where maybe they already own some property in the community, they already have some workers and they're paying salaries and there's other activity going on, you would click on existing business. Now, if we do that, as I've done here, we can see in the background We're getting new sections coming in to ask about the company's level of current operations. We're not going to get into that right now, but just be aware that that's what that question is really getting at. Now, for categorization purposes, you can select the project type and the industry here. Again, it looks like this before you get started, so we can see if we wanted to select the recruitment, then it'll just select it for us there. As we kind of begin this, thinking about, we've already entered the information in, but as you're entering a project from scratch, for example, you would go through these first couple screens to get this information entered. So here, the next little section that we see is the scenario location. And this is where we would identify which taxing jurisdictions will be affected by the project. So in this case, it's in the city of Burleson, Burleson ISD, Tarrant County, and that sort of thing. If I hit, I should mention that you can also put in a location, a specific address, and that'll map on the visual there as well. And then finally, the last kind of modal section here that we keep at the top of the scenario info pages is asking about the scenario NAICS code. This is where you can specify a specific NAICS code. So we had identified that this was in our advanced manufacturing sector or industry, but here we can actually get down and identify a NAICS code associated with this project. And when we do that, Impact Dashboard, the model, is going to pull in multipliers specific to that industry and obviously specific to your region. So in this case, we're seeing a type 2 employment multiplier of 1.74. So that means that for every direct job that's created, there's 1.74 total jobs created in the community. So that's the one direct job plus 0.7 spin-off jobs. And you'll see that multiplier will vary based on the specific industry. If you were looking at maybe a restaurant or something like that, the multiplier might be a little bit lower. A 1.7 multiplier is reasonable for this community for a manufacturer. We do have the option to enter custom multipliers if you want to. You can kind of overwrite these fields. We can also kind of pull out our multipliers and just say, let's forget about all of the spin-off. I can just kind of toggle that and remove any of the spin-off benefits, and then see maybe how that affects our net benefits. But that's these first three screens. On the list here, we have the other kind of main inputs that we want to look for. We're showing just by default the first 5 years, so you can kind of see how this lets you phase in the employment. For example, I've got, in this case, just 50 jobs in year 1 and 45 jobs added in year 2, so that's a total of 95 jobs. If we wanted to kind of see how this progressed over time, you can stretch that out by clicking on the little arrows and seeing it in a little bit more detail. Again, the sections here are pretty straightforward jobs. We have an input about what percentage of the workers might be relocating to the city. So if you know someone's bringing a bunch of workers from outside of the area, and some of those workers might represent new households for your community, you can capture some of that. If we keep clicking through here, we have inputs for salaries, so kind of the average salary of the workers. We can see we put in 50,000, so we're seeing that come through here. We've got inputs for capital investment, different types of capital investment specifically, so we can see the building and maybe the furniture and equipment investment. Again, as I continue through here, we've got inputs to allow you to enter the amount paid for building permits and fees, the amounts of taxable inventories that might be subject to property tax. This is a Texas example, so we've got taxable inventories in here because of the state of Texas still taxes inventories. Some states don't tax inventory. Some states are, there's a lot of differences. Just be aware that as we build this for you, it'll kind of match your local tax structure. So if you don't have inventories, you won't see some of these fields, for example. We've got inputs for local taxable purchases or local taxable sales. If those are applicable, you can enter them in. If they don't apply, you can, of course, on any of these things, just leave them blank. And then we have an input called hotel nights here. We're kind of looking at maybe the visitor impact. And so if the project is going to be responsible for some hotel nights, we can pick that information up and maybe pick up some hotel occupancy taxes in this case, or maybe some general sales tax just from visitor spending in the community. On this scenario info page, as we've been going through here, we've got a couple other inputs just to add a description if we want to. And then we can also put in some internal notes. A couple things to know here as we're talking about reports today. The description that you type in is going to be shown on the project fact sheet and the detailed report. So just be aware that anything you type in here is going to be showing up on those reports. If you have, if you're trying to use a code name for the name of the company or something like that, don't put the real name of the company here. It'll get shown on the reports that. But if you do have some internal notes, things that are kind of for your eyes only, you can put those here in this text area for internal notes. So we kind of have two different sections, one for description and then one for internal notes. So the internal notes will be just only visible to someone who is logged in and looking at this page. We touched on the public support tab. This is where we're going to be able to, I should back up just a moment here. I went down this left-hand side and I didn't even mention the right-hand side, but ultimately the right-hand side is giving us that dashboard view of our results as we enter the information in. So we had plugged in 95 jobs over 10 years. We're seeing the 95 direct jobs represented here. We're using that multiplier. We can see that's a total of 165 jobs in the community. We see our information about salaries, information about the capital investment. We can also see when we translate those economic impacts into fiscal impacts, what are the additional revenues or benefits for the community over a time period? In this case, this is a 10-year analysis. And then what are those additional costs for the city in this case over the 10 years? We can hover over these things and kind of see these numbers, and we can take the difference and figure it out there with the orange. We can also click here and get a table view of these same numbers. So here's our benefits, costs, and net benefits for the city of Burleson. Now, if you're interested maybe in what's happening for the county, you can click there for the county and see similar information at the county level. Now I'm going to go over to our public support tab now, and we're going to look at our incentives that we've modeled. We've got the option to offer incentives from any one of these jurisdictions. And so I'm going to just focus on the city today. So I'll click on the city. If I scroll down, we can see I've got a property tax incentive that I can put in here. I've got some options for sales taxes, even a hotel tax we can rebate. And then that final option here is called a non-tax incentive. This is the one that we just use that term non-tax incentive because it's not tied to a specific revenue source. So in this case, we're thinking of a $400,000 infrastructure grant. And so we're plugging in just the $400,000 being paid out in year one. Now we think of that incentive as an investment in the project. And so the $400,000 investment gets compared to the return that it generates for the city over the next 10 years. And so in this case, we're using the net benefits, the additional revenues minus any additional costs for the city. We're looking at the city's net benefits as the return on that investment. So if we go over here, this orange line is kind of showing us the estimated net benefits over the 10-year period. And this is kind of on a cumulative basis. It's going to be about $1 million of net benefits resulting from this project. And so we can calculate our payback period and rate of return. So if we're looking at this, we have a 2.8-year payback period as it gets calculated. That's just telling us that if you invest $400,000 into this project, it'll take 2.8 years to get back, to pay back that $400,000 in the form of net benefits. And so we can kind of see that here as this orange line kind of clicks up between year 2 and year 3. The orange line is intersecting with that reference line for the total incentive of 400,000. And so it's shown here to be somewhere between year 2 and year 3, and it's calculated to be about 2.8. We're also calculating a rate of return. This is the average annual rate of return. So if we just say, hey, we're going to get about $1 million over 10 years, that's about $100,000 per year. And so if we just think of that $100,000 return on an investment of 400,000, it's about 25 or 26% average annual rate of return. So that's what we're doing with this incentive. Now we did have options to maybe offer other incentives. So for example, I'd already kind of typed in like a little bit of an abatement schedule here. If I wanted to add in an abatement or an exemption on the building for the first couple of years, we can do that. And what you'll see is we'll be reducing the net benefits, reducing the taxes that we'd be receiving by the city, and kind of seeing the value of the exemption. So we thought we were going to get about $800,000 in property taxes. If we exempt about 440,000, we really only get about 360,000 as the city. But I'm not going to actually do that. And so rather than have to type or kind of overwrite all of these things, I can just uncheck these boxes and it'll remove it there and get rid of the exemption. Now, that's the city. If the county were going to offer an incentive of some type, maybe it's a property tax exemption, or maybe it's just another additional infrastructure grant. Maybe they're going to pitch in an additional 100,000 or something like that on the infrastructure grant. You can model that as well. And so if we were to do that, maybe we put in that the county is going to chip in 100,000 for infrastructure as well. Now we can compare the county's investment. Again, the county's investment is only 100,000, and we can compare that to the net benefits that the county will receive. So the county's return on investment. And so there we could see in this case, the county's only getting 260,000 over the 10-year period, but we have a similar 3-year payback period in this case. So that's kind of what's going on with our public support and kind of modeling incentives. Now we'll go back to our reports and kind of talk a little bit more about those reports and the different things you can do with them. So we'll start again with our fact sheet. We've looked at this one, but we can talk about how we get the information on this screen. So one of the things that you might notice is, for example, the 75,000 square feet of manufacturing space wasn't really identified anywhere on the scenario info page. So where did that come from? And in our case, it came from the prospect filling out the data form. But if you wanted to kind of dig down and maybe they called you and said, hey, it's not 75,000, it's going to be 80,000, you can go in and edit that. And the place to do that is going to be on our scenario details. As I mentioned, we have these two different sections. One is scenario info. It's kind of the curated list of the primarily quantitative inputs about the project. And if you're just trying to get an impact analysis run, the scenario info page is where you want to go. Now, we also have this other area where it's kind of just a long list of all of the details. That is going to be where you can configure some of this information. So it's this icon here, or we've added this little kind of shortcut link. We can click on Go to Scenario Details, and it's going to let us find all of the inputs that we see here on this page, as well as a bunch of others. So if I click on Go to Scenario Details, it's going to jump us over, as I mentioned, to this Scenario Details area. And I can scroll down here and I can find where we've entered the square footage, and I can even update that. So for example, as I'm scrolling down, I can find our square footage section. If I want to, you can kind of jump to it by finding it over here on this menu, and it'll jump to that section. Let's just say it was going to be $80,000, or excuse me, 80,000 square feet instead. We can update that. And now we can go back to our report and we'll see that that gets reflected here. So really all of these fields that you see on this page can be edited or configured on the scenario details area. So as we're looking at this, again, this is a one-pager. It's going to print off to be a nice one-page summary of the project. Again, just sticking straight to the facts, not doing any analysis on the project yet, but this can be a nice kind of summary, as I say, cover sheet to present the project to your stakeholders. Now we do have this print button here, and sometimes it's a little confusing. If you hit print, one of the options you have is to save it as a PDF. So if you're wondering, how do I actually save a PDF of this thing? You just go and click on print, and then make sure your printer or your destination is to save it as a PDF. So that's how you can save these documents or share them then later on. If you scroll down, we can see we've added some additional information on this one. We have that project description, which we can put in, but then we've added some other fields here as well. And in this case, we kind of treat them like due diligence sections. So we have this one called community fit. The cool thing is on this report, you can actually rename the section title. So if you didn't want that to be community fit, you can go back again to our scenario details area, and we can jump to our due diligence fields. And now we'll see this area where we've entered in the text, and we can change this and call it something else. So maybe it's whatever it might be, hiring details or something we want, whatever we want to call it. In my case, it really is community fit. So I'm going to actually probably should leave that, but I'll show you how this will update for you. So we can see now it says hiring details, and I can change whatever text is underneath there. We can do that. Same thing with recommendations. You might not always have a recommendation, so you could either delete that section or maybe use it for another purpose and give it another name. Again, the recommendations can be modified back here in our scenario details in our due diligence section. So we can see our recommendations is editable if we wanted to call it something else, and we can even change the text there as well. One thing I'll point out is this due diligence section, just kind of a little bit of a handhold, or maybe just to tell you, some things to think through. You can access this due diligence checklist for economic developers on through that link that I just clicked on as we look back here. It's here in our due diligence section. Click here to review our economic development due diligence checklist. And here we can see some of the things we think it's useful to think through as you're putting a project together or maybe considering an incentive. And so these are some of the prompts, so to speak, and then maybe you can use these as prompts to address them in the section, say, for example, in community fit. The business background you might address in the company notes. So we have a section for company notes as well, which will appear on that fact sheet. So that's the kind of the big idea behind the fact sheet. Now, you certainly don't have to fill this out if you're just trying to get to those impact results and maybe see how that $400,000 incentive compares to the net benefits. You can skip by this and not really worry about filling it out. But on the summary report, again, we've got a summary report for each one of the jurisdictions. We also have one for the kind of the community, and that one's one that you can configure. We'll talk about that in a moment. But here on the city's summary report, we're going to try to pull together the three major pieces of information here as we think about an impact analysis for economic development. And those three things are going to be the economic impacts, which are kind of summarized up here in the upper right-hand corner. We've got jobs, salaries, capital investment. We're also touching on the residential development. So the idea that maybe people are relocating or moving to the community as a result of the project, and that's going to have some impact on the residential side of the community. So we translate all of these economic impacts into specific additional revenues or benefits and specific costs. And so at a very high level, we can see those lists or kind of see those projected out here. These dark blue bars representing our benefits, those total up to 1.7 million. These lighter blue bars, those are the kind of the negative numbers, the costs, those add up to about 700,000. So on a net basis, we're looking at net benefits, the orange line, of about $1 million over the 10-year period if we were to add all those up. Now we can scroll down here and see the specific source of some of these revenues and some of the costs. Again, this is a Texas community. They have local sales tax. They've got all these different types of property taxes and some of these other revenues. Another community might look a little different depending on the specific revenue sources. One of the cool things I'll point out here specific to sales taxes, for example, will be this pop-up table. So you can see I'm hovering over the sales tax word. You can see my mouse turns into a pointer, and I can actually pull up a table that gives me more detail on how we got to $228,000 of sales taxes. So just to kind of, we see the 228,000 here. If I click on sales taxes, it gives us a little bit more detail. And what's interesting is, in this case, you've got a lot of different sources of sales taxes contributing to the 228,000. So in our case, we've got some sales tax we're picking up from the initial purchase of construction materials, the construction worker spending, so some of the construction spending going to labor and then those workers re-spending money and that sort of thing. Those initial purchases of furniture, fixtures, and equipment, some of that might be subject to sales tax, and so we can see what we're estimating here in this case for the city. The workers and the spin-off workers might be spending some of their earnings in the community, and that will generate some sales taxes again over 10 years. So we can see all the different sources of the potential sales tax revenue. And so the 228, it's shown here in total, but we also break it out whether it's coming maybe from the project itself versus assumptions about the households and new workers. So that's kind of a cool little thing you can kind of check out there as well. We've got one on property taxes, which isn't as interesting, but we can see we've got it broken out between land versus buildings. In this case, when we say real property, it's really only reflecting the building because we didn't put a land value in this particular analysis. But that's showing us kind of a little bit more detail. Again, this is over the 10-year period, so those are 10-year numbers. But that's tying back to this $1 million number that we saw in the summary as well. And then the incentive analysis kind of in this gray box here is just showing us kind of a little bit of a generalized version of that same detailed graph that we saw in the other area, where we see the $400,000 incentive being paid out in year one. We see our orange net benefits extending up to about $1 million over 10 years, and that intersection being identified at 2.8 years. And so we can see that same information that we had on the other pages. Now, if we wanted to, we could, as I mentioned, print this off, just click here, save it as a PDF, or actually print a physical copy. The other summary reports will look similar. In this case, this is for Tarrant County, so we're seeing their results. And we can also see that analysis, that same analysis of the $100,000 grant or infrastructure grant against their net benefits. Again, their net benefits in Tarrant County, as we look at it here, they don't get any of the local sales tax, so we don't see, say, for example, a sales tax section here. The other summary report I'll kind of point out is this community report. So we've got one for each jurisdiction we've included, and then we've got one for the community report. It's a little bit of a generic term, but what we're doing here is we're going to let you configure a one-page report to include whatever districts you would like. So for example, maybe you're trying to put together a summary report that shows both the city impact and the county impact in one table or one page, and you want to get those things all on one page. As you know, we just looked at it, we could see it on, you know, one for the city and one for the county, but now we can actually configure this community report to show the city and the county together and kind of what they would be in total. So as I look at it here, it's already set up. It's got city, county, the school, and then some other districts, and it shows us the total. And so we actually don't want all of these jurisdictions. We just want the city and the county. So what we can do is click here. This configure button is going to let us, as I hover over it, we can see which jurisdictions are included. If I click on it, we can actually select or deselect whichever ones we want. So for example, I can get rid of the school district, I can get rid of the hospital, and get rid of the college, and maybe I accidentally remove the county. So I want to add the county back. I can just select whichever jurisdiction I want from our dropdown. I'll add the county here. And then we can see those are the districts we're going to use in the community impact summary. So as I do that, now I come back to our table. We're seeing our net benefits now are 1.3 million. We remember the city was about $1 million and the Tarrant County was about 260,000. So together, we're adding it all together here, and we can see it's 1.3 million. And so we can see that detail here in these columns showing us the various benefits and costs, and even noting our non-tax incentives. So again, our 2.8 year payback period for a $400,000 incentive and a 3-year payback period for that 100,000. So that's just another way to kind of generate some results here, or to show a specific example of a combined kind of one pager. Now, if you do want a detailed report, you can always click over here to the detailed report and get that multi-page, maybe 10 to 15 page report with a narrative and a little bit more detail. The way that this is set up, we've got kind of an introduction. We include the description of the project if it was provided. Again, this is if you typed this in, we'll show it here. And so this is going to be that information that's not confidential, right? So the description of the project is going to be included in the report. And then as we see over here, we have the different sections we can jump to. So for example, I can jump straight to the economic impact overview and see the jobs and salaries and so forth. I can keep scrolling down. I can see what the population impact might be for the city as we think about maybe people moving to the community and that sort of thing. And then the third table here is showing us our taxable property. So we do a bunch of estimates and we say, okay, this is the anticipated taxable property over the next 10 years in Burleson, and this is what we're going to be using as the basis of our property tax calculations. As I continue to scroll down, we show an fiscal impact overview. So at a high level, what are the benefits, costs, and net benefits for each one of the jurisdictions? We can see this in a graph here as well. Again, I'll scroll down a little bit more and we can see our public support overview. So we're trying to summarize for our company that we're offering these incentives to. Look, the city and the county are going together and it's going to be a total of a $500,000 infrastructure grant, for example. And then as we see, we can kind of continue navigating here on the left-hand side. We can jump to our city section. This is just showing the various benefits, costs, and net benefits. These were summarized a little bit pretty much the same way on the summary reports that we already looked at, but we get a little bit more detail here with the breakout between the project versus households. But the total number we've seen before in many places. If we jump again, we can scroll there, or I can jump there. We can scroll through all of the Burleson information, and then we'll get to Tarrant County, and then we'll show all of the information for Tarrant County, including the incentives. And then ultimately, we're going through the last few districts here. And then the last section of the detailed report is our methodology section. So that's what's going on with all of these reports. Again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in as we're going along. But that is a deep dive in some of those reports that I wanted to show. A few other things I want to point out, just kind of showing you capabilities of Impact Dashboard here. We've been in this one scenario quite a bit. I'm going to close out of it, and we're going to go back to that area where we have all of our scenarios. And just to let you know, we have these options on a particular scenario. We can rename it. So if we want to give that a different name, we can also copy it. And what that's going to do is going to pick up right where we left off with that particular scenario and let us iterate from there. So rather than having to retype everything or change all of the assumptions that we might have changed, we can just hit copy and it'll let us kind of start a new iteration right from there. So think of that copy button kind of like the save as. If you were working with an old Excel document and you kind of had one scenario and you wanted to do a different version, and you might do a save as, that's kind of what that copy button is going to do for us. And we also have the delete button, of course. If you got scenarios that you don't need any longer, you can hit the delete button there. So that is some of how this comes together. Now, I want to show a little bit about these data forms. So in this case, as I mentioned, we have a data form here. It was received in the app, and we used that original data form to create these scenarios. Now, if I click on this, I'll be able to pull up the data form that shows me exactly what that prospect provided or what they submitted when they filled out the data form. And we'll take a look at what the prospect experience was like when they filled out the data form. But this is what I received, as we can see here. So the cool thing about the data form is that we're going to give you a summary of the information the prospect provided. So they're going to actually fill out kind of a lot of step-by-step detail here, individual fields. But when we send it, and when they send it to us and we receive it, we actually summarize it in this like bullet point format, so we can kind of get a sense, pretty briefly, just by reading through the bullet points, of what this project is all about. Now, again, we're looking at this data form that was submitted in September 13th, 2020 by George at Mandalay Industries. And I can print this and save it if I want, but we can also notice that this is kind of read only. So I can't make any changes to it because this was the data form that the prospect submitted. So this is like, you can think of like that PDF copy that is not, you can't be changed. So that's what you can do here as we're looking at this, as we're viewing the submitted data form. But let's kind of take a step back and see the process of what the prospect would look at when they're submitting a data form. So if I go over here on our menu, we've got this area for data forms. We've got an inbox and templates. I'll jump to the inbox first. This is where you're going to receive that data form. In my case, I've already got 4 different data forms here that I've received. I can hover over these, and for example, if I wanted to take this data form and create a project using that data form and kind of creating a scenario from that data form, you can do that just with those clicks. I can also keep track of the status of different folks that might have started a data form but not fully completed it. And so I can see the date they started it and the date they last updated it, for example. I can help them get back in there. I can send them an email and say, hey, complete your data request from ED corporations here. And I can send that email to the person that was working on the data form. I can also look at a list of all of my assigned data forms. So we were looking at this one from George from September 13th, 2020, and that was associated now with my project, Mandalay Industries. So this is kind of where those data forms will go and where you'll be able to access them in the future. But to actually request information, we can use our templates. So again, I'm going to click on our templates button up here, or we can click at the menu item over here on the left. And our data form templates, I've got, this is a little overkill, I would say, for most of our clients. You might, as a client, you might only create one data form, and that is your data form, right? I've got a couple different versions that I've set up and created. You can, if you want to create one from scratch, you can click Create Template. Just by default, when you log in to your account, you'll see that you have kind of two different options. You have a basic data form and then a complete data form. I'll click on this basic data form just to give you a sense of what it looks like. So this is, keep in mind, this is the data form template. So this is where you can choose which specific questions you're going to include in your data form or application. You can give it a name. You can identify the contact for, if there are questions on the data form, you can put your contact information in there and let them follow up with you, for example. And if I scroll down here, this is where you'll actually select all the different questions. So for example, if I wanted to ask them about their specific plans, so is it going to be, you know, are they going to be leasing or owning, that kind of thing. Let's say I wanted to ask them about their timeline and, you know, if they're going to when they break ground, when they'll begin local operations. I can turn these different fields on and I can kind of deselect them if I don't want them included. So if I've got the specific fields that I want to ask the prospect, and I've deselected the ones that I don't think are important to ask the prospect, I've got this all set up. I can now preview the data form. Now, we can preview it just by kind of scrolling through it, which is fine. Or the best way is to preview the wizard as the prospect would see it. So this is the data form. If I click here and preview it, this is what the prospect is going to be presented with when they access your data form. So you get a welcome screen with a custom message, so you can type in anything you want. This will be your logo here. This will be your contact information here. If I hit get started, it's going to ask for a couple basic pieces of information of the prospect. It's asking for the name, email address, and their kind of what their role is at the company. And then the first kind of, before we get really into the data form, we want to know, is this a new business or is it an existing business? And so when we get to an existing business, we know we need to ask about their current operations. If it's a brand new business, we just ask about what's the project all about. So I'll show for right now existing business, and now we'll see we have in fields on our wizard that will include questions about the company's current operations. And then we'll also ask about the expansion. We have a place to apply supporting details, so add a text description. We can also ask them to attach documents, get some information about the company. And then finally, the prospect will have the opportunity to review this before they hit submit. So again, this bullet point summary is going to be visible to you as the user, but it's also going to help the prospect kind of review the information that they've submitted, or that they're about to submit, I should say. So I'm going to hit exit here, but that's what it looks like when the prospect is filling it out. So how do we actually get this data form to the prospect? And so the way to do that would be on this share button. So my basic data form is what I want to do. So I'll hit share. And now I have the ability to send it to a specific email address. So if you know who you're working with or who you're interacting with, you can put in their email address here. And this will let you send an email, and you can customize each section of this. And once you have an email address in there, you can hit send, and it'll send an email to that prospect with a link to fill out the data form. And again, when they hit that link, it's going to look like that data form wizard we just looked at. Now, the other option you have, other than sending an email to a prospect, would be to send it to obtain a link. And this link can be pasted, can be posted on your website. And anytime someone clicks that link, it'll open up a new iteration of the data form for that user. And they can, you can direct people to your website, and tell them to click on the button for the data or the incentive application, for example. And if you use that URL, it'll let them, fill out the information and send it to you, kind of almost unrequested in that sense. So just posting the URL on your website. So that is kind of how you can create these templates, configure them, and share them with prospects. As I mentioned, when they complete the data forms, it'll come in here to your inbox, and you'll be able to create scenarios with that information. I've gone through a ton of information here, but if you have more specific questions about Impact Dashboard, you can feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Paul Shurin with Impact Data Source. I'm an economist and principal. If you'd like to get on a demo, just let us know. Or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. Thanks so much for joining us here. I don't see any questions coming in at the moment, but feel free to reach out afterwards. My email address is just paul@impactdatasource.com. And thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.